Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Walk and Talk, the dog training podcast designed to hold your hand and make you feel just a little bit less overwhelmed and a little bit more in love with the prospect of sharing your life with your four-legged flatmate. And if it's your first time here, then a very warm welcome to you as well. This podcast is like 93% dog behavior advice, dog training tips, neuroscience nuggets, all the good stuff, and about 7% me moaning about the weather and getting overexcited about whatever's currently trending on Netflix. But mainly, we are here to talk about dogs. So, without further ado, this week's episode is going to hone in very specifically on one behavioral issue. I feel like I haven't done this in a while. And it's one issue that I know is a big problem for a lot of dog owners. I would say, especially for owners of larger breeds or owners of teenage dogs for reasons which will fairly quickly become evident. And that problem behavior is counter surfing or just any kind of problematic stealing, essentially. Dogs just thinking that it is oodles and noodles of fun to grab something that doesn't belong to them and run off with it and have the time of their lives with it, regardless of how you feel about the situation and whether that is food off of the table or the counter or your shoes to go and chomp and chew on or whatever else is available. I think there are few things when it comes to problem behaviors inside the home that make dog owners feel quite as defeated as counter surfing and stealing. And it can feel relentless, can't it? Like, okay, you clear the kitchen counter, you move everything out of reach, you clear the tabletops, you turn around for a moment, and somehow they still manage to find something anyway. That one little thing that your child left out or your husband put on the side. 'Cause it's always the husbands, isn't it? So, basically, in today's episode, I'm going to explain this behavior to you in ways that you perhaps might not have ever considered it before, trying to help you understand it a bit. And once you really understand it, I will do my best to help you fix it and solve the problem. So, we are basically going to look at why dogs steal things, right? Why do they do it in the first place? Why counter surfing and the like then seems to become such a persistent, hard to break habit for our dogs. What's actually happening in your dog's brain when they go and grab that thing, and why punishing them and scolding them and making a big fuss about it all rarely solves the problem. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem. And most importantly, the training and the management strategies that actually are going to help you make a change. So, first of all, the most important thing to highlight is probably that your dog isn't being naughty when they do this, not to them anyway. Rather, they are behaving exactly how their brain is designed to have them behave. So, let's normalize the problem. Okay. If you have an adolescent dog, particularly like around about 8 months old to sort of 12, 14 months old, that middle section, counter surfing and stealing is incredibly common because at this age, dogs are basically experiencing several developmental changes. Okay. So, number one, their curiosity and their forward drive to explore, if you like, absolutely explodes. It blows up. So, adolescent dogs are biologically wired to go out there and explore. Their brain is basically saying, what happens if I investigate this? What happens if I grab that? What will happen if I go over there? Like, I need all this information. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? Exploration is a critical part of the learning process when it comes to learning about their environment. And this is the age they need to do that, if you think about it, right? Number two, their impulse control is very much still under development, shall we say. So, alongside this explosion in the curiosity drive, the brain structures responsible for impulse control, particularly the prefrontal cortex, are still maturing. So, even if your dog knows a behavior, their ability to resist temptation is limited. It is especially impeded during this time, which, for those of you who are parents to human teenagers, as I am, or you have been at some point in your life, this might sound very familiar. Your teenager probably knows, intellectually speaking, in their heart of hearts, that something is a bad idea. Sounds like a really bad idea. Um, that isn't enough to stop them doing it or trying it out anyway at this age. They're still probably going to do it because the impulse control that we understand as adults, it's just not there. It's not accessible yet. And number three, our dogs are extremely opportunistic. So you have to remember that dogs evolved into opportunistic scavengers. So, for most of their evolutionary history, right, food obviously was not just served in bowls at predictable times of day. Of course, it wasn't. We know that. They actually survived by noticing any kind of opportunity to score food and just taking it. We know that canines are predators, so we often think about like the hunting drive and the chase drive and all of that kind of stuff. But we have to remember how strong the scavenger instinct is in them as well because of their evolution alongside human civilization. So, something edible or something that smells appealing or looks interesting on a shelf or a tabletop or somewhere, that's exactly the kind of opportunity their brain evolved to take advantage of and to act upon as a survival mechanism. So when your dog steals something off the counter, they're not just being naughty. They are not trying to push your buttons. They're doing exactly what their brain is designed to do. They are ticking a big neurological box, if you like. So that's why it happens in the first place. That said, now let's move on and talk about why it then becomes this repeated and persistent behavior if we're not careful and we don't address it in the right way. So, the reason that stealing like this becomes such a powerful habit for our dogs basically comes down to the reinforcement science that goes alongside this behavior. Because we know, don't we, as a really basic generic rule of behavior, that every behavior that continues or every behavior that is repeated, it exists and it continues in that way. It continues to exist because it has been reinforced in some way. It has been rewarded. It has delivered a positive outcome. Now, because of the nature of counter surfing, this is actually one of the most reinforcing behaviors a dog can discover because of something called the jackpot effect, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So, imagine that your dog, they hop their front feet up on the counter or the table or whatever, and they happen to find half a chicken sandwich or some leftover pasta or some cheese, or maybe it's just like a few crumbs on a chopping board that you've left out and you haven't got it in the dishwasher yet, right? Something like that. Now, that experience for your dog is like winning a little mini lottery or a scratch card. Their brain releases dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter associated with reward and learning. And dopamine does something very important because it strengthens the memory of the behavior that led to that reward. So your dog's brain learns, okay, jumping on counters, having a look up here, doing this behavior sometimes leads to really amazing things. And the word sometimes, as I'm sure you gathered from my emphasis, is really important because actually variable reinforcement, so sometimes finding something absolutely amazing and sometimes finding nothing at all, and sometimes finding something in between perhaps, makes this reward learning even more powerful. The key problem is that it's incredibly likely that your dog doesn't get food every time they check the counter, but sometimes they do. Now, when it comes to training and behavior, we call this a variable schedule of reinforcement, and it creates incredibly strong habits. It's so powerful that it's actually something we actively integrate and use in our toolkit as trainers into training new behaviors like recall, for example. And it's the same mechanism that makes things like slot machines so addictive to us humans. When it comes to slot machines, you pull the lever or you push the button or whatever you do. I don't really know because I don't think I've ever used a slot machine, or not in my accessible memory. Maybe I did as a child. I don't know. I can't have done it as a child because children aren't allowed to gamble. So I don't think I've ever used a slot machine, but however you do it, you take your turn over and over and over again, don't you? Like repeat, repeat, repeat. Because occasionally, only occasionally, and sometimes maybe not at all, but occasionally there is a little jackpot. You get your big win out. You hear the ching of all the coins hitting the tray at the bottom, but you don't win every time. But occasionally you win really big. And it's that unpredictability that makes the behavior incredibly persistent. And for dogs, counter surfing basically works exactly the same way. Even if they only succeed 1 out of 10 times, the behavior becomes extremely persistent as a result of that one win. Now, the next problem is that when your dog does manage to get their jaws into something, the response of so many owners is usually to chase the dog, make a big fuss, grab the item back, and probably scold the dog in some way, like make a big fuss. But this is basically the best way for you to accidentally create a really exciting game of keep away for your dog. Because from the dog's perspective, if you switch it, they go and grab some kind of exciting object. That's fun. Their owner then reacts dramatically and gives them loads of attention instantly, like they've just pushed an attention button, and they run after them. And suddenly there's this really fun chase game afoot, and the dog's having a whale of a time. So, actually, before you know it, that behavior of counter surfing now has multiple reinforcers. It's not just the bit of cheese that they found on the counter. There's novelty, there's attention, there's movement and basically play as far as the dog is concerned. And there is this energy and excitement that comes with it as well. And the dog basically learns stealing things like this makes life really interesting. And this is why calm trading is actually your best response when it comes to your dog getting a successful steal. So, if you are still at the stage where your dog will calmly trade items when asked, that's a really good sign because it means the behavior hasn't become possessive, it hasn't got problematic. Possession problems often develop when items are forcibly taken away from the dog. Whereas instead, trading teaches the dog that giving things back leads to something good. And that keeps the emotional tone of the whole thing calm and cooperative. So you can either just straight up offer a trade if you know it's going to be well received and it's going to be easy, or you can distract your dog and do like an out of sight trade. So you could toss a handful of treats out and away, like through a doorway. And then when the dog drops the sock or the shoe or whatever to go and get those treats, you can then quietly retrieve the item while the dog's not looking. And there's no conflict, there's no loss, and we mitigate any real risk of any kind of resource guarding developing as a result. So the other option is, of course, that if the item that the dog has got is safe and you are not bothered, you basically have to chalk the incident up as a loss and a management fail on your part and just ignore your dog. Like if they stole a bite of sandwich, don't turn it into a massive game. Just ignore it. Let them have their little victory as long as what they have stolen is safe and it's not gonna hurt them, it's not gonna make them sick, it's not gonna cause an issue. So that said, as our little response to when it goes wrong and how we can handle an incident, let's now look at the real long term solution. How do we stop this from happening? And Solving counter surfing basically requires two parallel strategies. Okay. Number one is management, and number two is like active skill building. And both of those are equally important. Equally important, and we wouldn't just do one. Okay. So, strategy one, management, which in my opinion is grossly underestimated as an approach because I think so many owners see management as failure. They see it as, oh, I can't train my dog not to do this thing, so I have to crate them, or I have to use a baby gate forever, I have to do this because I failed. But it's actually one of the most powerful tools in long term behavior change. And management simply means basically reducing opportunities for the dog to practice the unwanted behavior, because ultimately, every successful steal strengthens the habit. Every rehearsal is like a hole in the bucket of progress that you are trying to make in eradicating this behavior. And for counter surfing and stealing, obviously, some helpful tools and ideas that you could try specifically for this problem would include things like baby gates, so limiting access, keeping dogs just full stop out of the kitchen during food prep or when these novelty items or, nice smelling things are going to be out and about and available. Generally keeping your counters and tabletops clear, using things like food storage containers, just being a bit more savvy about what you're doing with food in the kitchen, and using pens and barriers. Again, it goes back to baby gates, but also crates, room dividers, all of that kind of stuff during adolescence when we know that this behavior is most prevalent. And thinking about the items that you just generally leave laying around the house as well. So it's not just countertop stuff. I can hand on heart tell you that I have never had a dog in my life who chewed up a shoe or a sock, which, are like the most chewed up things by puppies and dogs, aren't they? Because whenever I've brought a puppy home, I've activated a flat out ban on shoes being left out. Full stop, not happening, not an option. Every single shoe that came off a human foot went straight in the cupboard during that time frame. And so now that my youngest dog is 2 years old, I've got an old dog here as well. She's nearly 13, or is she 13? Maybe she is 13. Oh God, so I block it out of my conscious mind how old she is because I don't like to think about it. She's very elderly, but she's very healthy, so it's all good. But my youngest dog, right? He's 2 years old. So he's grown past the need to chew for teething reasons or whatever, and he's past having that crazy lack of impulse control. So we don't have to hide all our shoes away anymore. We don't have to do it. We have shoes out all over the place, partly because I live with teenagers, and my God, they could not care less about keeping anything tidy, could they? But also because we know that we can. We know that those shoes are safe. The dogs never had the opportunity to learn or rehearse that behavior when it was a risk. And so now it's a behavior that just doesn't exist because there was no reinforcement of it. There was no rehearsal of it. That's what management gives you. And I often describe all this stuff simply as like, think of it like training wheels on a bike. It's not permanent. It doesn't need to be permanent. It just protects the training process whilst your dog's brain matures or whilst you are actively working through some kind of behavioral adjustment training plan. And that then brings me on to the second part of the solution, which is teaching the dog what to do instead. Because we know that dogs learn faster and better and easier when we replace behaviors rather than just trying to stop them, rather than just giving a blanket no. And so, some powerful alternatives for this problem could include number one, you could reinforce forepaws on the floor. So, just spend time rewarding your dog simply for remaining on the ground near counters and tabletops. And a really good and easy time to practice this is, say, when you are cooking dinner. Have your treat pot there. So, every time your dog, is sat there beside you, but they're keeping 4 feet on the ground, they're staying grounded, mark and reward. You are simply teaching being near all of this tempting food and staying calm, staying down there, that pays really well. That is reinforcing. Another alternative, and I really like this one personally, is kitchen station training, which is just teaching your dog to settle on a specific mat or bed or boundary in the kitchen, having it there in the kitchen as their station. This is exactly what I did with Albie when he was a puppy. And there is a video of me doing it on TikTok, like a little tutorial video that will talk you through how to do it, how to approach it. But essentially, we just randomly but repeatedly reinforce any calm behavior on the bed while food is being prepared in the kitchen or whilst you're just pottering about the kitchen. It doesn't really matter. And over time, the dog learns whenever food is around, whenever they're doing something up there that I might be interested in, whenever anything's happening in this room, my job is to relax here, right here. And it works really well because the boundary is crystal clear. They are either on the bed or the mat or whatever it is, or they're not. So they are either getting reinforced or they're not. And so I tend to find the learning happens really, really quickly, especially if this is something that you implement early on when you bring your puppy home. Now, another thing you can do is actively teach a cue that's going to be effective in this situation, like leave it or drop it, and work on your disengagement skills as well. And again, there are step-by-step tutorials on how to do this on my Instagram account, which is at Listen Dog Training. Because if you put the work in, a strong disengagement cue basically teaches your dog to notice something interesting and then voluntarily turn away from it, which in turn helps to build impulse control as a skill or a muscle, if you like, that will get stronger and stronger the more we practice it and the more we make it rewarding. And alongside actually having a cue, a specific cue and instruction, you can work on just building food neutrality generally. So you can practice controlled food training exercises where food is present, but the dog is just rewarded for ignoring it. And you start really easy, obviously, and you aim for the small wins and you build up the difficulty over time. Rome wasn't built in a day, but you work your way up to that success level. So, all of that said, I don't want to skip over something else, which I think is just as important when it comes to behaviors like this, but that a lot of people might not even think is relevant. But, well, look, it's relevant to everything, it's relevant to pretty much every problem behavior. And that is meeting your dog's needs. Because dogs who steal frequently are often seeking either stimulation, novelty, attention, interaction, or chewing opportunities. If they're young and they're teething, or they're stressed and they're seeking to self-regulate. So you need to make sure that your dog's daily life includes enrichment activities, or at the very least, some accessible enrichment toys, chewing outlets that are safe and satisfying and readily available, training games that not only fulfill your dog's mental needs so they're not bored and frustrated, but are also fighting the good fight when it comes to building those skills and behaviors that are actually going to directly help solve the problem. So, impulse control games, teaching a leave it cue or a drop it cue, teaching a boundary or a bed cue. All of these things should become daily exercises for dogs whose stealing behavior is a problem. And don't forget just the general letting your dog be a dog stuff. Long exploration walks where the dog has agency. Throw some scent work in there, whether that is scent work training, formal scent work, or enrichment, or just chilled out sniffy walks. Breed appropriate outlets like digging or swimming or herding games or whatever's relevant to your dog. A fulfilled brain ultimately is far less likely to go searching for mischief than a brain that is understimulated and underfulfilled. And just in case anything in this episode has made you feel slightly overwhelmed, I will wrap things up with the good news, which is that this behavior really does tend to improve with maturity. For so many dogs, counter surfing is very much an adolescent phase. And as the brain matures and impulse control develops, the behavior becomes much easier to manage, especially when you also throw in your management strategies, your active training, and ultimately your patience, which I know is sometimes easier said than done, but it's true. It's not something you should just ignore and put all your faith in, the concept of them just growing out of it with time. But it is something that, with the right supportive strategies in place, will absolutely become less prevalent over time as your dog matures. So, if your dog is currently stealing everything in sight, please know that you're not alone. This behavior is truly incredibly common. It's not a reflection of bad training or a bad dog or a super naughty dog. It is simply typically a young, curious brain interacting with a world full of opportunities, scavenging opportunities, and making exactly the choices that it has evolved over thousands of years to make. But with the right approach, with the right combination of management, active skill building, and a commitment to truly meeting your dog's needs on a daily basis, this behavior is absolutely something you can turn around. Okay. So I hope those of you who face this problem, I hope you found this episode helpful. I hope you are feeling slightly less stressed by the loaf of bread that disappeared on Wednesday or the chicken sandwich your dog scored last week. And you now have some ideas on some tweaks and changes that you can make going forward to tackle the problem head on in the most positive and productive way for both of you. Um, and with that said, it's probably about time that I loved you and left you to enjoy the rest of your dog walk. So I shall do so. I hope you guys have a fabulous week, and I will see you same time next week for another episode of The Walk and Talk.